Well, hello everybody. I'm Larry Kuperman. I'm going to be presenting today on the business of games. I explained that this is developing a philosophy for success. Let me tell you a little bit about me to start. I have not written a line of code in over 40 years. I am possibly the least talented person in the world when it comes to graphics, and I am laughable when it comes to online gameplay. When we have to test a multiplayer game, my developers always kill me. Yet I have been somewhat successful in the games industry, and I can honestly say that I have fun every day. My goal is to teach you what I've learned in the hope that it contributes to your success. So who I am, my credentials. I have been in the games industry for close to 20 years. In the beginning of 2001, I joined Stardock. We published games that included Galactic Civilizations, Sins of a Solar Empire, Demigod, and Elemental. From 2008 to 2011, when I was at Stardock, we developed a platform called Impulse back in the day. And that was, if you want to think of it, it was a competitor to Steam. In 2011, that was sold to GameStop, and I joined GameStop as the business development manager. I'm in charge of their PC digital sales. In 2013, I wanted to get back into a studio that was actually creating games, and I joined Nightdive Studios. I've been the director of business development there for almost 7 years. We have published over 100 titles on Steam, GOG, Xbox, Switch, and soon PlayStation, including the System Shock and Turok games. Blood Fresh Supply, which we did for Atari, and this earlier this year, Doom 64 that we did for Bethesda. At the at the bottom of this slide, I explain that I also have academic credentials. I was graduate of New York University. I completed an MBA. I was selected as the Scholar of the Year. I joined the Business Honor Society. None of that really matters. Let me rephrase that. I have never gotten a job in the games industry because of something they taught me in university. However, almost every day on the job, I have applied things that I learned in school to my career and to becoming more successful. I am very proud of my education and what it means, and I will talk a little bit more about that later. I have quite a large presence in the media. All of Nightdive does. We frequently get written up in everything from The Escapist to VentureBeat. Recently did an interview for PC Gamer on Nightdive being one of the few distributed companies. This is part of my strategy for success for the company. We make sure that we keep an active profile and that we keep our users aware of what we are doing. In addition to the professional things I do, I'm also active in the International Game Developer Association, the IGDA. I'm the co-chair of the Las Vegas chapter. I have been selected as a regional coordinator, and I do mentorship there. I also have been acknowledged for some of my volunteer activities that include service to both the Red Cross and to the World Health Organization. Volunteering is very important to me, but I will also speak a little bit about why organizations like the IGDA are important for developers and really should be on your roadmap for success. So the business mindset is a philosophy. What does that mean? Well, it's an approach to problem solving. It is analytical, data-driven. You ask questions and you accumulate data that helps you make decisions. It's a guide for making decisions from everything from how you design your game to who you hire. It is not just about profitability, but profitability is an important aspect of it. And By way of an example, to put this into practice for you, I'm going to discuss something that everyone in game development faces as a challenge. How long should I work on my game and still be profitable? Why you should care about profitability? Well, if you're an early game designer and you want game development to be a career, not just a hobby, you need to make money. If you want to be happy in the business, I'll show you a little bit more about this, but the primary source of dissatisfaction cited on game development forums is a disconnect between how much money they make and the effort that it takes to create a game. What defeats us is often a lack of a business focus at the very beginning of a game. And you need to ask yourselves, how do we expect our games to generate money? How much money should we expect? Where will we sell them? And what will we sell? So again, I don't want to make this too serious for you, but this was a cartoon that I actually saw on one of the largest game development forums, the Indie Game Developers Facebook page. So the thought process here is a developer saying that he and his partner worked 2 years on the game. They barely paid themselves. They put in hours and hours of work, and it seems reasonable given how hard they work to charge $15 for the game. And all of the gamers are yelling at them that they're greedy. They're just going to pirate the game. It only had 3 hours of gameplay. How dare you ask for money? The truth behind this is that a lot of people, when they ask themselves the question, how much money should my game make? How much money should I expect my game to make? Base that on how much money they need, not on a realistic expectation of what they're going to get in terms of revenue. And I'm going to show you how to answer that kind of question. So again, not keeping this too serious. I think everyone knows the South Park episode with the underpants gnomes. So the chief underpants gnome explains their plan. Phase 1, we're going to steal everybody's underpants. Phase 3 is we're going to profit. And now all we need is phase 2. Of course, there is no phase 2 that's going to make profit from stealing underwear. But everyone that I know on the business side has watched this episode or is familiar with this idea as something funny, that's something to be avoided, that you need to have a really sound idea on how you're going to make money from your game and what you can do to maximize the amount of money that you make. And the point is that the business model that you have needs to be well thought out and realistic from the very beginning. And I will talk about that. So there's going to be some math here, but I'm going to start off with some very basic definitions. Costs. What goes into costs? Well, the largest thing for independent game developers is development time. But other items are equipment. So you're working using your PC, your MacBooks, your iPads, your iPhones. Any licenses, and I'll give you some examples of that. How much money you're going to spend on marketing. And then I say that to be profitable, costs have to be less than the revenues. And the reason I put it this way, most of the time you would say it the other way, that revenues have to be greater than costs. But the reason that I put it this way is the only part of this equation that you actually control is the costs. You cannot make your game sell more by praying, by hoping. That's not what's going to happen for you. Your revenues are going to be what your revenues are, and you need to have a realistic expectation of that. But let's talk about the things that go into revenues. The sales of the game, selling the game through a platform like Steam. If you're doing mobile development, although it's true of PC and MMOs also, ad revenues are part of it. I use the word net, which means to be deducted. Net of platform fees. So you remember that every time you sell a game, on any of the platforms. Steam, Nintendo, the Play platform, Apple are going to take their share. And there are going to be other deductions, taxes, VAT, returns, VAT, of course, being the European tax system. All of those things are going to come off. So you have a gross revenue, which is your total amount of sales, minus those costs that you have to pay, giving you a net revenue. So how do you determine your costs? Well, developer time is going to be the single largest part of it. But I'm going to tell you to track everything. Track all your coding time, the time you spend creating art, the time you spend talking with your fellow developers, those discussions, your meetings. You're going to want to have all of those numbers at your hand, and there are a couple of different reasons. First of all, you're going to need that information when you plan out your next game. But there are a couple of other things that you will see later on why this information becomes important. There is an expression used by old guys like me that time is money. But it is in a really, really serious way that your time is what you are spending. So the question is going to come up, how do you assign value? And we'll go through some ways that you can do that also. One of the key things that I will talk about in several different places is rely on your fellow developers. And I don't mean just the ones that are working on your game with you. I'm going to talk about the people that you meet at game jams like this, the people that you go to university with that are also developing games, fellow developers in your area, and I'm gonna talk quite a bit about how you need to reach out to other people. That is going to be a key topic, and it is one of the things that you can do that is easiest in some ways, hard in some ways for developers, but that you can do that will help you become more successful. So I'm going to advise you to build your business network. Your business network is going to have valuable and relevant sources for information. Remember that wages and how much money you should expect to get is dependent on your region, on where you live. It is different in Brazil than it is in the United States. Even within the United States, the amount of money a developer gets who's working out of Las Vegas, which is where I live, versus the same developer doing the same tasks in San Francisco is widely different. They also have different costs of living. It's much less expensive to live here, therefore salaries are lower. It's much more expensive to live there, which is why salaries are higher. Sometimes by reaching out to other developers in your area, you might get a job offer or an invitation to join their team. Another thing that I'm going to say to you, that I'm going to stress to you, particularly in this time of the coronavirus epidemic, having contacts, even online contacts, is an antidote for loneliness. I know a lot of people that used to do most of their coding work at coffee shops, at cafes, simply so that they could be around other people, and now they can't do that. And if you look at any of the numbers, mental health issues, particularly among developers, have grown quite a bit. So let's talk a little bit about how you're going to build that business network. And I'm going to encourage everyone that's listening to this to find game developers. How do you go about doing that? Well, let's start off with find out if there's an IGDA chapter that is near you. It's one example. As I mentioned, I am the co-chair of the IGDA of Las Vegas. We only really restarted that. It had existed before, but we restarted that about two years ago. When we restarted it, it had 2 members. Since that time, it has grown to 536, I think, as of yesterday. We do presentations every month. We bring in speakers. They're, of course, online now. but we do that, and it is a great way for developers to network with other developers. So the IGDA chapter is one way. You can also use search engines, type in your area and look for game developers in that area. You can use social media. LinkedIn is my preferred path, but Twitter also works. This is a great way to find information, and I always encourage people always to be honest. If you DM somebody on Twitter, or if you reach out on Facebook, disclose who you are. I'm a game developer just starting out. Would you have a few minutes to answer some questions? Always be ready to use the word I'm asking for your help. Be candid and be honest about that. Now, I'm going to tell you, if you are like many game developers and you are an introverted person, this can be hard, but let me assure you, it is so worthwhile for you. So, you've now reached out, you've now created a little bit of a business network. You're looking for a way to gather some information. And the first thing that you start out with, you have been following along with what I've said, and you have been tracking all of your time. So here's what you come up with. For this example, you and two friends work on your game for 2 years. You each devote as much time as you can, but it's uneven. So you track the number of hours, and you can do some conversions. And these are things that, these are terms that you may not be familiar with. And this is something that will come up a couple of times. But if you ever want to work with a publisher, they expect you to know these things, and they expect you to have this at your fingertips. An average work week has 40 hours. That is calculated by 5 days of 8 hours of work each. Yes, I know. There is no developer that only works 8 hours a day, but that's the way we call this goes back way before my time, but that is the average work week. A man month is the number of hours worked in a month. There's some variation here depending on how you want to calculate it. In Europe, it's about 140 hours across a month. In the United States, the definition is closer to 160 hours. And then there's annual time. Again, there's some variation, but generally we think of it as being about 2,000 hours. That would be 50 weeks of the year, 2 weeks off for vacation, 50 weeks at 40 hours per week. So these concepts are foreign to most developers. We think about working as long as it takes on our game. So why is this important? Well, you're going to need it for your own growth and your own professional development. You're going to need this for your other team members, especially when you're first starting out and you start talking about sharing revenue. The issue will come up that person A worked 2,000 hours and person B only worked 1,000 hours. So person A deserves twice as much money as person B. You're going to need to have that kind of thing at your fingertips. But there's another reason for this. If you get in front of a publisher, if you go and you meet with, I don't know who you would want to publish your game, EA, Team 17, if you go to Exola for funding, if you go to any of those big organizations, the first thing that they're going to ask you is how much did it cost to make the game? What are the costs? What are you looking to recover? And if you have this information available when you walk in, if you say, I've invested this amount of time, two things. One, you have satisfied their question, but perhaps more importantly, you sound like you know what you're doing. You sound like a professional. So, revenue terms. I started to talk about this a little bit before, but let's go into it. The sale price, gross revenue is calculated by the sale price multiplied by the number of units sold. So as a simple example, you sell 1,000 copies of your game on Steam at $10 each. So your gross revenue is $10,000. The net revenue, which is the amount that you will actually get paid, is the gross revenue less allowable deductions. Store fees, Steam retains 30% as an example. returns on your game, fraud. In this case, net would be $7,000 or less. Steam is pretty good about fraud and pretty good about the return policy, so it shouldn't be much less, but it will still be less than that $7,000. Then you have other allowable deductions. Taxes and VAT are standard. But if you sign with a publisher, there's often a paragraph defining what those deductions are. These can include such things as marketing expense. In the old days, when we used to sell games at retail, marketing development funds, MDF, were a huge deduction. So your game has been placed in a GameStop store, and they say, well, would you rather be on the bottom shelf where no one will see your game? Or would you rather be on the top shelf where you're at eye level? You say, of course, I'd rather be on the top shelf. They say, good, this is how much it will cost you. You need to be very aware of these deductions, especially as you go through a contract with any kind of publisher. A true story for you. The second game that I sold, we signed a contract with a publisher, and this is when I worked at Startup. We signed a game with a publisher, and we agreed that marketing was an allowable deduction. Sure, it seemed to make sense for me. Marketing helped sell the game. We wanted them to do that. We were willing to pay for it. Well, it turned out that I was paying the salaries for their entire marketing department. Not only was I paying their salaries, but every other company that signed up with them was also paying those same salaries, that they were making money off of marketing for doing very little effort. So, you know, platform fees are an important part of it. You need to look at those other deductions as well. Something else to be aware of, and this is fairly recent, but there are major differences in the platforms. So Epic, for example, charges you a lot less than Steam does, and if you have major game in Unreal, even less than that. So that's just something to be aware of. But for convenience, I'm using the 30% rate as a standard platform fee deduction, which is what Steam charges, and what you will find being charged by both Apple and Google on mobile. So how do you know how many copies you're going to sell? Well, you really can't know that, but you can make an educated guess. You find titles that are similar to yours in the same genre, titles with a similar size development group, and then you start looking. There's a fair amount of data that's available online. I gave you actually a screenshot from Steam Spy, and Steam Spy is one example. There are a whole lot of other tools that you can look at that. But I'm going to tell you that the best way to come up with an accurate sales projection for your game is through networking. And I don't mean an internet connection. I mean networking with other developers. All right. So what you should do is begin to get some data on how games that are similar to yours sell, and you should kind of look at an average. I'm going to use a hypothetical model, and I'm going to drill down into it. And the type of game that I'm going to talk about is a visual novel, which is a type of game that, frankly, I know basically nothing about. But I'm going to use that as an example. Something that I will tell you right up front, and please remember this as a very important part of the lesson. Make sure that you only compare your games to things that are similar. So if you're pitching a visual novel, you don't want to say, well, look at how many copies Fortnite sold. So how do you find comparable titles? Well, if I was hired as a consultant for an indie working on a visual novel, I'd probably begin by heading over to Itch. I'd start looking at titles, and I'd find one that is close to that of my clients. Clicking on it gives me a link to the developer studio, and in some cases to contact information. In many cases, you can get the person's Twitter handle. Reach out and ask them if they can spare some time. Hi, I'm an indie developer working on a game similar to your title, and name their title. So if I was contacting the developer behind Loving Flesh, I would say I'm working on a game similar to Loving Flesh. And would you be able to spare a couple of minutes to help me by answering some questions? So there are two things about cold communications like this. And when I say cold communications, I mean you do not know the person at the other end. You're contacting basically a stranger. And I will tell you to do the same thing that you would do if you were on the street and you needed some directions. Always be clear that you're asking for help and that you won't take up much of the other person's time. Just remember, time is always precious. Get to the point, don't waste their time. I usually won't stop with just asking about one title. What I'm going to do is I'm going to find as many comparable titles as seem appropriate. If I get lucky and establish contacts with all the developers, well, then great. I now have a network of people that I can talk to about my games. But you don't need to begin by browsing itch or Steam. If there's a particular title that influenced you, and that happens for almost everyone, if there's something that made you want to get into game development, that's a great place to start. Reach out to the developer behind that game, explain how influential the title was to you. Flattery is always good, and ask for their help. So, we learned through our research and through networking that the best price for our visual novel game is actually $5. I've contacted a number of developers and found that the lowest end of sales was about 2,000 units. The high end was about 8,000 units. And we're going to use an average of about 5,000 units for our model. And we're going to sell our game on Steam, again, just for convenience. So the equation becomes 5,000. That's the number of units that we think we're going to sell, multiplied by $5 times 70%. Remember, 70% is what's left over after Steam takes their 30%. And that comes out to about $17,500 in projected net revenue. So with this information in hand, we can now answer the question, how long should I spend in developing the game? We've now been able to create a budget for our game. So we have a budget that's $17,500 to work with. If our costs are less than that and our sales projections are accurate, we'll be profitable. Oh, furthermore, it turns out that all the tools that we need to create our game are free for use. We're fans of the Doki Doki Literature Club game, and it turns out that the tool that they used was Ren'Py. No cost, and even support is free via the forums. Further, it turns out, conveniently, that the going rate for developers with our level of expertise in our home location of Brazil is $17.50 per hour. So we want to create our game in 1,000 hours or less. If we create it in 1,000 hours or less, that means we're going to be profitable. If we take more than that, that doesn't mean we shouldn't make it, but that the game is going to be less profitable. So what do we do with these numbers? Well, I said that the business philosophy helps you make decisions about every aspect of the game, including design. With the goal of creating the game in 1,000 hours or less, you can now examine your work habits. It turns out that you average 20 hours a week working on your game as a one-person studio. That means that you want to complete your game in 50 weeks or less. So now you have the start and the end points for your development. You are willing to spend 50 weeks creating this game, make the best game that you can in those 50 weeks, and you can develop milestones to fit those goals. Why do I emphasize about milestones? A milestone is defined as a goal with a time limit. Saying that you're going to spend 20 hours a week for 4 weeks to learn the software and you're going to have some Python that you'll use is something that you can keep track of. Having these milestones helps you to stay on track and measure your progress. The other part about having milestones and why you need to have milestones as part of your development plan is if you ever want to sign with a publisher, they're going to ask for those things. So some tools and resources to help you. And these might seem simple that I'm mentioning these things, but Twitter. In looking to build up your network, Twitter is the easiest way to reach your fellow developers. Unfortunately, until you are known, your direct messages may be ignored. But you should continue posting about your game on Twitter, and you should always make sure that you check your messages, because there might be a developer that you need trying to get in touch with you. LinkedIn. Many developers ignore LinkedIn because it has a business focus, but that is its very strength. You can search by company name. You can search by person's name. You can get the person's title and their background before you ever reach out. I recently had a call with a company that is based out of China. And I was working with someone who was one of their business managers. When I looked him up on LinkedIn, I found out that he and I had both gone to the same university in New York. And at the very beginning of the call, that was what I talked about. We talked a little bit. I asked him what year he graduated. We talked about going to school there, about what that experience was like. And by the time we got to the business, we had a somewhat warmer relationship. The other thing that LinkedIn is really good for, and please, please, please do not ignore this, is once you have developed a network of contacts on LinkedIn, as you look to grow that network, you can ask people to do an introduction or a referral for you to new people. The last thing I'm going to say to you, and I'll give you some discussion about it, but email. It might seem funny to you that I'm calling email out as a tool, but writing a business email that gets a response is becoming a lost art. And I have some tips for how to write an email for success. So first of all, first thing is know your audience. Do not write generic emails. They become spam. When I say that, I mean you want to write each email individually, where you are asking a specific question to a specific person. I'll talk about this a little bit out of order, but use the person's name. There is nothing that catches your attention as much as seeing your name on an email. Always be focused and get to the point. Use keywords. If you are asking for things, use words like help, advice, referral. Those are attention grabbers. And the subject line is your friend. So if somebody was emailing me and they wanted to get my attention, sending me an email that was entitled, Larry, new developer seeks your advice, would be something that I would open. I'm going to tell you guys a true story, something that happened to me not long ago. I was out with two young developers. We were meeting up to have a dinner out here in Las Vegas. And I received an email that had to be 6 paragraphs or more. It would have been over a page of just a block of text. If I wasn't waiting for my friends to arrive, I would have deleted it immediately. But instead, I replied to the person that wrote it saying, I'm sure that you're asking me for something, but I have no idea what it is you're asking me for. Turned out that the person was actually a streamer from Mixer, back when there was Mixer, and they wanted a key to one of my games. And I told them all that they had to do was to say, hi, I'm a streamer with an audience of 10,000 people, and I'd like to ask you for a key. That saves my time in reading it, and I immediately know what they want. I would have been happy to do that. They were lucky that I took the trouble to respond to them, but they felt that they had the need to tell me their life story right at the very beginning. I need to tell you, I'm kind of busy, and I really wasn't all that interested in their life story. So always get to the point. Always ask for what you're looking for. If you're looking for help or advice, use those words in your email. And again, always use the person's name. Just some websites and tools that you might find helpful. The igda.org is a great place to find fellow game developers. It is also good for your professional growth to be part of that. I would recommend it, especially to young people. Steam Spy. I don't know what web pages you read, but let me recommend one to you that should be part of your daily reading. Gamasutra.com, which is focused on the business of games. It's a games news site and blog site. By the way, when I say it is a blog site, you can also publish there if you ever want to write a story about your trials and tribulations in trying to make games. Another great website, and I know Jay Powell was one of the speakers that the Game Jam brought in, but Powell Group Consulting Online Business Matchmaking Services. It helps connect indie game developers with publishers. And thank you very much for listening to my presentation.
Eu conheci a Gazeus organizando uma Game Jam e pelo meu trabalho a Gazeus entendeu que eu seria aqui uma peça muito importante para construir essa empresa.
No ano passado, a Gazeus também me encontrou numa Game Jam. Eu estava trabalhando num projeto como Game Designer e hoje em dia eu faço parte do time da Gazeus como estagiário de Gente em Cultura.
Participando de uma Game Jam e organizando Game Jams foi possível com que eu viesse para a Gazeus e começasse a administrar hoje o produto mais relevante dessa empresa.
Essa possibilidade de fazer novas conexões ou mesmo melhorar as suas conexões com pessoas do seu time. Às vezes você já tem um projeto em andamento, você já tem amigos com quem você trabalha e esse é o momento ideal para você conseguir alinhar a expectativa de todo mundo quanto a um projeto que às vezes em 48 horas, por menor que seja o projeto, ele vai te dar muita informação.
Eu acho que o que mais dá pra gente tirar de legal, assim, que a gente aprende na Game Jam é a gente colocar a mão na massa mesmo, sabe? A gente testar coisas, sabe? Exercitar bastante o nosso lado criativo, assim, testar bastante coisas ali.
Seja com uma equipe que você conhece ou com uma equipe nova, você aprende a trabalhar em equipe nas diversas esferas que podem existir. Você aprende a lidar com pessoas diferentes e aprende a trabalhar com elas em conjunto. E a Game Jam te possibilita isso em um curto espaço de tempo.
Porque são nas Game Jams que você vai encontrar as pessoas mais apaixonadas por desenvolver jogos. As pessoas que querem realmente criar produtos novos e transformar o mundo dos jogos. Então, nada melhor do que procurar nesse ecossistema as pessoas que vão construir uma empresa muito maior.
E é por isso que nós da Gazeus acreditamos na Game Jam+.